My name is Phillip Syrios, if you didn't know, from my brother Andrew Syrios doing his first presentation and stuff. I'm going to focus almost exclusively on property management. It's what I know, it's what I've done, it's kind of my whole deal within the company. I know due diligence and property management don't quite go together, but Andrew's been working on his expertise in due diligence for a long time now. He's been through, what, 350 houses and 170 apartment units and done all this stuff a lot of times. So he knows that stuff really well. Just kind of what we know, we're kind of going over with you guys. First of all, any questions you guys have this whole time, feel free to raise your hand, ask the question. I have about 2 hours of stuff to go over. I'm going to take a quick break after about an hour. I don't want you guys to get too zoned out on everything. If you have any questions, I want this to be more of a dialogue. If I don't get to the last half of my slides, I'm not really that tied to them. There's so much in property management. I want to tailor this to give you guys the most valuable information I can. So if I'm not going over the stuff that's important to you guys and you guys have questions, feel free to ask those questions. We'll go down tangents if that helps the overall group here. I'm totally fine with that. But I got about 2 hours. If you guys don't have a lot of questions, a lot of things that I can kind of go down. There's just too much to cover, so I just picked some stuff that I thought I could kind of add some value for you guys. When it comes to who you guys are is really what I want to know, so I can try to tailor this presentation towards you guys as much as possible. So I kind of want to get to know you guys a little bit, see kind of where you guys are, where to kind of lead the conversation and stuff like that. So first question I have is, who's just starting and doesn't have any rental properties? Okay, quite a few of you guys. That's great.
I'm an N of 1 right now. So.
Oh, that works great. So having no rental properties is totally fine. I actually really congratulate you guys for coming here and learning this stuff. You are going to save a lot of money if you listen to just like 2 or 3 things that I have to go over here. So it'll be very, very helpful. So who has less than 5 rentals? More than 1, but less than 5. Okay, so we have probably half the room or a little bit more have less than 5 total rentals. That's kind of good to know. Who has between 5 and 20? That's kind of getting to most of the room. What about more than 20? Just a couple. What about more than 50? More than 100? Okay, so it looks like, 20 to 50 seems about kind of where we're maxing out there. Okay, so now a couple other questions. Who has less than 1 year of experience in real estate? Okay, about the same people who don't have any rentals and stuff like that. Okay, so I'm getting a good sense. Who has between 1 and 5 years of experience? Okay. Who has between 5 and 15 years of experience in real estate? That's me right there. So some of you guys experienced the fun years of 2008, 2009. I missed those years. I've actually never been a property manager during a recession, so I probably have that excitement in front of me to experience, which will be fun. Who has more than 15 years of experience? Okay, now what about anybody here have more than 31 years of experience in real estate? Okay, good. Nobody has more experience in real estate than how old I am, so that makes me feel a little bit better about this. So yeah, I'm 31 years old. A couple more questions I want to figure out about you guys. Who manages just for themselves, or partners, or kind of maybe a spouse? Who owns just for themselves? Seems like quite a few of you guys. Who manages third party for other owners, other people? Okay, just one. So I'm just going to have a little disclaimer here. I might say not the nicest things about third-party managers. That's not directed at any individuals. I've had bad experiences with it. I think there's some difficulty with it. There are some really good third-party property managers. I don't want to cast the net over everybody, but there's some issues with third-party property management that I think are just inherent to what it is, but there's definitely a need for it. There's definitely a reason for it, and it can be done well, but I'll go over kind of my issues with it in a little bit. Who manages just houses? Okay. What about who manages apartment units? Okay, not that many people manage apartments, mostly houses. That's mostly what I do. Anybody do on-site property management, like actually like an apartment complex of a bunch of units or anything? We got one. Okay, got a couple people who do that. Okay. So I kind of get a sense of the room. It's mostly people on the beginning side of things, which is kind of what I expected. Most people between 0 and 5 rental units, which is kind of what I hope for. Again, if you have any questions about what I'm going for, feel free to ask. But who am I? I'm from Eugene, Oregon. West Coast. Some might say it's the best coast, but I grew up there. I enjoyed it there a lot. Beautiful town. I really liked it. Grew up there, lived there for the first 24 years of my life. Actually, it's known for being, I think, hold on, I think I might have the wrong pictures. Wait a second. There we go. We got the rain, got the guy riding his bike. That looks more like Eugene, Oregon. Lovely rainy weather, got the gray skies, wet grounds. That's what I'm used to. So yeah, I grew up in Eugene, Oregon, lovely little town. My dad started real estate back in actually '81. He started the current version of our company in 1989 when I was 2 years old. He bought a lot of property around the University of Oregon campus, did a lot of campus rentals. I wanted nothing to do with it growing up. I did some landscaping for him growing up. I really didn't like it. Who here likes doing landscaping? I don't. That's not me at all. That was not my thing. But I did go to the University of Oregon, which is in Eugene, Oregon. My dad lived very close to campus. He bought and managed campus rentals is kind of what he did. I actually moved further away from campus to go to school. I've kind of always been someone who I knew wouldn't do well with the boss. I wouldn't do well kind of working a job. I've kind of always wanted to forge my own path, kind of do my own thing, figure it out for myself in a sense. I went to school and I barely went to school. The only reason I never dropped out is because I knew if I dropped out, I was never going back. So I kept going. Took me 5 years, but I finally graduated with a degree in business at the University of Oregon. It's really kind of the general degree to have. And it also kind of fit what my mentality was to, kind of create my own thing. I kind of feel like I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I wanted to innovate. I wanted to build my own thing. Not in real estate. My dad did real estate. That stuff's dumb. So why would I do that? But I graduated in 2009, 2010, and they weren't really giving out a lot of jobs at that time, if you guys know. I didn't really want a job. They weren't really giving them out at that time. So what did I do? I gambled my money. I actually became a professional poker player for about a year. I played poker in college. I made most of my kind of living expenses that way in college. And then once I graduated, I didn't want a job. There wasn't any jobs anyway, so I started playing poker. Learned a lot from that. I wasn't a high roller. I wasn't, making millions of dollars, getting on TV and stuff like that, but made way more money doing that than I could from a normal job. Learned a lot of stuff. I noticed how comfortable I was with risk. Real estate isn't exactly risk-free, as you know, but it is an investment in a sense. Poker is kind of the same way. It's a little bit more variance, more kind of wins and losses in it. But I always knew if I had pocket aces and someone else had like a king and a deuce, I would win the hand about 80% of the time. Now, it doesn't mean I'm going to win 100%, but generally I'm going to win. So I always want to get my hand in good. I always wanted to put myself in a position to generally win over long term. So I might, go to the office for 18 hours and play poker, end up losing a bunch of money. I had no problem with that idea of working really hard and losing. But I knew if I set things up right, made the right plays consistently over the months and over the years, I would make money. And that's kind of what I gathered from it. Now, you never going to have a guaranteed thing. That's true with life in general. It's true in poker. It's true in real estate. But you want to make the best bet over and over and over again. And you want to set up the situation so the cards are in your favor, basically. Now, with playing poker, so I ended up not really wanting to continue to play poker. The biggest downfall about it for me was if you're not at the poker table, you can't make any money. Now, in real estate, you can make money when you're not really doing anything, right? That's kind of the dream of an entrepreneur. You make it big so you don't have to work all day. You're willing to work, what is it? Entrepreneurs are the only ones willing to work 12 hours, are willing to work, I can't remember the exact saying, but basically you're willing to work 12 hours so you don't have to work 9 to 5 or whatever the saying is. But I didn't really like playing poker because if I wasn't at the poker table, I wasn't making money, and I wanted something that could generate wealth outside of, me working every day. And real estate, my dad knew it. It was an option. I mean, how many of you guys are in real estate because you want to build a retirement or because you want to generate long-term wealth that you don't have to work for? I mean, that's kind of the rich dad, poor dad kind of dream of real estate in a sense. Yeah, so we got some people who do that. So my dad wanted me to get involved in real estate. 2011 is when Andrew moved out to Kansas City. And my father said, hey, why don't you go join him? He's got an extra bedroom. And I just said, nah, I don't think so. I don't want to get involved in real estate. He kind of kept asking. That's kind of how my dad is. Eventually, I said, fine. And I came to realize what he considered was a bedroom was a room you could put a bed in. It was underneath the office. There was no windows or anything. And oh, well, I knew nothing at the time. But I moved out to Kansas City. This is where Andrew had lived. And I think I did this again. I have the wrong pictures. I'm sorry. There we go. That's the Kansas City we know, right? Yeah, so this is actually kind of exactly how Andrew found Kansas City when he moved here and how it's been recently. So lovely Kansas City. I just kind of started off knowing absolutely nothing. This is where Kansas City real estate was when I moved out. It had gone up and up and up and up and up, hit a peak in about 2007, and started dipping down. Now, Andrew was doing everything out here when I moved out. He was buying the houses, he's rehabbing the houses, he was managing the houses. He had about 60 units or so that he was doing this with, and he just couldn't keep it up. Now, my brother and my dad were smarter than me at the time, and they knew that this wasn't going to continue going down. We were at a point in the market that at some point it had to jump back up. And they were willing to put all their money on the table and bet on their aces, basically. There was no guarantee. There's never a guarantee real estate's going to keep going up. But they were pretty confident that things were going to start moving up for them. And so when I moved out, this is what it looked like since. That's pretty good. But we needed to get Andrew focused on buying real estate. That's what he had to do. Because if we didn't buy real estate and rehab it and finance it, which Andrew and my dad were doing, we were gonna miss out on this, which we knew was coming. So I went out there and I became the one to just manage the real estate. I thought I could do it. I thought I was great. I thought I was really good. I was not. Who knows what this is? Raise your hand if you know what this is. Hope you guys know what it is. This is an AC condenser. When I moved to Kansas City to become the property manager, I did not know what this was. That's a problem if you're going to be dealing with real estate. It's not that I was dumb or anything, I guess. I just never really thought about it before. They don't have AC condensers as much in Oregon. It doesn't get quite as hot out there. I just didn't know what an AC unit was. I never thought about it. I saw them all the time, but I never really took much time to think about it. Another story about how green I was and how much I thought I knew. Andrew, early on when we were in Kansas City, he had to leave for a wedding. And I stayed in Kansas City, and my job was basically to make sure the building didn't burn down. I wasn't really supposed to do a lot other than make sure nothing really went wrong. But I was like, you know what, I'm going to show these guys I know what I'm doing. I can take over this property management stuff. I'm going to prove to them what I know. So we had this house on 114th Terrace that hadn't rented yet. I posted some ads. I tried to get some traffic to get it leased. This lady comes over. I show the house to her. She says, oh, yeah, I love it. I love it. I love it. I'm like, I got this. I know how to do property management. I just got this lady to say she loves this house. I got this. We're going to rent all of our houses, no problem. I go back to the office, I call Andrew, say, you don't need to worry about anything, I got all this figured out. This lady loves this house, she's gonna rent it for a bunch of money, we're gonna be rich. It's not really property management there. I mean, how many people have rented houses, had someone say they love a house, but they never ended up renting it from you? Yeah, so I called this lady back probably 10 times over the next 2 days, never heard anything from her. She never filled out an application, never paid an application fee, never put down a deposit, never paid a month of rent. I had no idea what I thought I had it all figured out, but I didn't even know the first step of it. So this is where I started. This is actually one of the first buildings I managed. It's just off of Independence Avenue. I became the sole manager of 60 to 70 units. I can't remember exactly how many it was at that time. Houses and apartment units. I didn't know what I was doing, but that's what I became in charge of. No property management experience at all. Again, didn't know what an AC condenser was. It's not really a good place to start. I had to go knocking on doors to collect rent. Who here has done that before? Especially in a property full of drug dealers and prostitutes. It's not the best situation to be in, but this is how I got my start and what I thought property management was at first. I had to figure out that that's not a good way to do things. And just the success of the company rested on me figuring out how to do property management at this time. Because if I couldn't figure that part out, Andrew wasn't going to be able to focus on buying properties. My dad couldn't focus on financing the properties. It really hinged on me figuring this out. So who am I today at this point? I've been doing property management since 2011. It's basically been all I've done other than my beautiful family back there is probably my only other thing that I've really accomplished in the last 7, 8 years. But that's kind of been my life, to figure out how to do property management. Currently, we manage about 486 rental units. The number changes a little bit all the time. I never keep it exactly straight, but it's a lot. It's a lot to keep track of, and it's a lot to deal with. We have a team of it's about 350 houses, 130 apartment units, all of which is located off-site. So we have an office on 72nd and Troost where we do our management from. We have a team of 18 people who either work in the office or work in the field that mostly I manage. Andrew manages too as well. And then one thing, I don't have a lot of experience with third-party management. Most of you don't do third-party management of managing for other owners. I technically do a little bit of it, but if you're looking for how to deal with angry owners of properties, not having full control over the situation, having to deal with their budget constraints and things like that, I'm not really the one to talk to about that, so I just kind of want to make that clear. But so basically what we decided to do is do-it-yourself management. That's kind of what we decided to do. Do-it-yourself management is really kind of like do-it-yourself contracting in a sense. You save money doing it this way. You need to have your expertise. Now, I have 2 big reasons why I think do-it-yourself management is the way to go. Now, third-party management, there is a reason for it. You need to be prepared to use it if you need to. If you don't want to sell your properties and you become incapacitated for some reason, you have to be able to move your properties onto a third-party manager, or you have to sell them at that point. You have to have it budgeted in to be able to pay that expense. Also, if you're doing it, you want to be able to pay yourself, basically, for your time and energy. So there's a place and time for third-party management. If you're out of state, third-party management is the only way to do it. You can't really do your self-management if you're doing it out of state. But everything we do is in Kansas City. My biggest reason for do-it-yourself management, in-house management, is nobody's going to care about your house as much as you do. Same with your car, same with your kids, same with anything. You're going to care more. You're trying to squeeze out another $50 in rent in the property. To you, it's $50 a month or $600 a year. To a property manager, that's $5 a month if they're getting a 10% fee. Are they really going to work that much harder for that extra $5 when they just want to get at least and not have to deal with it anymore, get to the next property to manage? For you also, that $600 is really important because that's pure profit at that point. You've already paid all your expenses, so that $600 can become really crucial to changing the return of what you're doing. The other reason I think do-it-yourself management is very important is even if you're not going to manage yourself, you have to know how to manage properties. Because if you're going to have a third-party management company, you need to know if they're doing well or doing poorly. You just have to know. Here's a good example of what can happen if you don't really know what's going on. If the sound will work. There you go.
What? $2,800? That's the estimate on my car? No, don't even do anything. I'm gonna think about it. Okay, bye.
Think about it. Putty says it's what it is, it's what it is. He's not gonna cheat you.
Except it's not Putty.
What happened to Putty?
Yeah, we had a little fight about the move. I took it to this other place. I think they might be trying to screw me.
Well, of course they're trying to screw you. What do you think? That's what they do. They can make up anything. Nobody knows. By the way, you need a new Johnson rod in there. Oh, Johnson rod. Yeah, well, you better put one of those on.
So don't get stuck installing a Johnson rod into your house. I mean, you need to know what's going on so you know if your property manager is doing a good job or not. A good example, that brick building I showed you a little bit earlier, we had that managed third party for a while and it was a disaster. That's where we got the prostitutes and drug dealers in the building that I had to deal with when we first started managing it. One of the things, my dad was kind of overseeing them at the time and he kept telling them, hey, if you can't get people, you know, renting the property, advertise on Craigslist, put some online ads on. And they said, oh, this area of town, people don't look online. You're not going to get any residents that way. We didn't really believe them, but we didn't know any better. We never managed in that part of town before. We never managed that kind of rental before. When we took it over, first thing I did was start posting Craigslist lead. And what do you know? People online go look for places to rent all over town. So we were getting leads all the time. They were just lazy and not actually doing it. And it was difficult for us to call them out because they were convinced, they were telling us, and we had no way to verify that kind of stuff. If you don't know what an AC condenser is, how are you going to know how much it costs? If they say it's going to cost $8,000 because you need to put a new AC condenser in, you can't really argue with them if you don't even know what it is. So you got to know how to do management even if you're going to have a third-party management company. So this is a little term that Andrew has coined for himself. So you have in-house property management. Again, I mean no offense, but if you go third party, it's kind of outhouse property management. There's good porta potties out there. You can find people who are great at doing it and will actually, you know, be honest with you and stuff like that, but it is very challenging and I really recommend doing it yourself. I think it's the best way to do it. And even if you have to have a third party manager for some reason, or if that's what your intention is eventually, I think you still have to know how to do this stuff. It's just critical. So my style of management kind of comes from an entrepreneurial background is kind of what I wanted to do. I wanted to turn it into an assembly line. I had way too much to do when I first started. I had a bunch of rental units. I didn't know how to do anything. I would encounter a problem. I would solve it. That same problem would come in again later. I'd solve it in a different way, and it just turned into a mess. I couldn't keep track of it all. So what I want to do is I decided, you know what? I played poker. All you got to do is win 80% of the hands and you make a lot of money. So I want to basically put it together an assembly line for property management where 80% of the decisions or more, whatever percentage you want to put next to it, the decisions go right in my favor over time. And I'm going to end up doing well. Now, I'm not going to be able to capitalize on every perfect situation, but generally, I'm not going to have to constantly make deals with residents. I'm not going to have to constantly figure things out. I'm going to have a system for how to do this. I'm going to make the same decision every time. And as long as that general hand that I'm playing, the policy I'm using, the strategy I have is correct, things are going to work in my favor generally. And I don't have to stress about what decision to make. I just have to do the work. I just have to play the cards and make it work. So I do assembly line. Now, here's the problem with doing assembly line with property management. There's a lot of parts to property management. There's a whole lot of parts to property management. This was just me sitting down for 2.5 minutes coming up. We got marketing and advertising, evictions, showings, tenant screening. There's a couple more. We got plumbing, electrical, customer service, drywall, Section 8, pets, HVAC, carpet cleaning, HOAs, tax. There's a lot of stuff. It just keeps going and going and going and going, and many, many more. I just put this together very quick. There's a lot of nuts and bolts to property management. Now, I can't go over all this stuff today, and honestly, what I'm going to go over is going to feel very surface level to me, and I feel like I'm only going to scratch one thing here, one thing there, and I'm not really going to dig too deep in anything because, honestly, I could speak for a whole week on property management, 8 hours a day, and I wouldn't really dig into everything. So, whoa, went a little too far there. So I want to kind of boil it down to some main points, some things that I think I can clearly explain to you to get, but there's just so much more than I can really explain. But there's one thing that is more important than anything else in property management. If there's anything you learn from this, it's one thing, and I already spoiled it, unfortunately. It's your air filter. I actually brought some air filters with me, and I was gonna try to juggle them, but I figured that was a really bad idea. But I wanted to drive this point home because it's kind of ridiculous. I'm not actually talking about air filters. I'm talking about filtering or screening. Basically, this is what air filters turn into. They collect a lot of gunk. These are actually 2 air filters we had in our houses at one point that I had pictures of. They collect a lot of dust. I mean, this is what they do. Take in all the gunk and dry skin cells and whatever, and they filter it, and you have a nice, clean house to live in. Now, why do I have air filters here? What am I referring to? I'm referring to tenant screening. Just like the air in your house needs to get cleaned and be pure and nice when it comes into your house, the tenants who move in need to be the same. You need to filter the tenants coming into your house. I wanted to juggle these to make a ridiculous kind of scene. Actually, I'm going to try it right now for you. So just picture this. Remember, you have to screen your tenants. I don't even have enough space. It's not going to work. But the whole reason for me doing this is to show something ridiculous so you can remember you got to filter the tenants coming through. You got to screen your tenants because you need clean tenants. Now, why do you need to screen your tenants? Because a leopard doesn't change its spots. That's kind of a saying. A tenant doesn't change who they are once they move into your property. If they're a bad resident, they're going to be a bad resident when they live with you. If they're a good resident, they're going to be a good resident. 90% of your job is just getting the right person in the house in the first place. And then at that point, just don't mess it up. As really 90% of your job is just getting that right person in. So when it comes to screening residents, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. First of all, fair housing. It's very important. Now, who here knows what fair housing is? This isn't a fair housing class, but I want to go over it really briefly so you understand. Basically, what fair housing means is you cannot discriminate against the 7 protected classes. I might miss one, but it's race, ethnicity, color, religion, gender, familial status, and disability. I might have missed one. I might have said one twice. I don't know. But so you can't discriminate against any of those classes. And I think it's really good, a good policy to have. But what it really means is you have to treat every single person the same, which really just fits into my assembly line model. You have to just treat every car that comes through the same. You have to treat every resident that comes through exactly the same and screen them in the same way. So use fair housing on your side. I mean, this isn't just for screening residents too, it's for when they're living there. You can't treat one resident one way and another resident. You can't forgive a late fee for one and not for another, because they can consider that discrimination. Because let's say it's, someone with a disability who you charge the late fee to when you let someone without a disability go for some reason. They can say, well, hey, you're discriminating against me because you want me out, so you're being really harsh against me, and you're not being harsh against these other people that don't have a disability. So use that as a guide of making your decisions consistent all the time, so it's basically the same thing over and over and over again, and you don't have to worry about making new decisions. Use fair housing as your guide. If someone asks why you're not going to forgive a late fee, use fair housing as a reason why. It's a really good crutch to use. Crutch is a bad word for it, but basically it's a really good tool to use of just forcing you to kind of keep that assembly line model. So when it comes to screening tenants, what are you actually looking for? Now there's 5 things I look for when it comes to screening tenants. Evictions, eviction history, criminal history, income, rental history, and credit history. There's other kind of fringe stuff you can do, but it gets really tricky at that part and really hard to replicate. You're never going to find a perfect tenant. You're never going to find a hand that's already won. You haven't put your money in yet. So you have to take some sort of gamble. You might have a tenant that's 99% likely because everything checks out amazing. You're still taking a small risk. You could have a resident or a prospect who fails all of these and ends up being really good. But that's like going in with the worst hand in the deck against the best. It's just not very likely. So you want to come up with a standard that's going to give you consistent, really positive residents over and over and over again. People have talked about things like checking the resident's car to see if it's messy or not, things like that. And it's just, there's no way to make those things very repeatable. And so I kind of generally discard that kind of stuff. Now, if they're very hostile or aggressive or something like that, or just things aren't working out from the beginning because maybe we've had some people who are very insulting to our staff before they moved in. We've made decisions on people like that we don't want to move in. But generally, we just look at these 5 criteria, keeps us in line with fair housing very well, and it works. So what actually are we looking for with this? Well, when it comes to evictions, just no. Just don't do it. Just no. Before you take someone with an eviction, leave your property vacant. Before you take someone with an eviction, lower the rent. Do something different. Now, you can only do a background check for actually up to 7 years. We use a company called Red Star Backgrounds. They're located in San Antonio, Texas. Kim has, what's the name of Rent Perfect?
I checked with them, they do not call.
They do not do the calls. But you can do that part yourself. But they do, the background screening for evictions and criminal and stuff like that, and credit checks, I'm assuming. So just don't take someone with eviction. If they're willing to get evicted from someone else, they're probably willing to get evicted from you. Now, there's great people who get evicted. It happens to really good people. But you just have to take the averages. On average, the person who's going to get evicted once is much more likely to get evicted again. It's going to be a huge nightmare. Who's had to go through an eviction before? I've gone through a lot of them. They're not very fun and they cost a lot of money. So just don't do it. Don't accept people with evictions. Now, there are some fringe cases where people they went to court at one point, but they got the eviction dismissed, or they never actually got a full judgment or anything like that. Generally, my rule of thumb is to stay away from that stuff too, for the most part. There are some very kind of, if they just got filed on and that's basically all that happened and everything else looks really clean, we can't allow stuff like that. But generally, if there's anything coming back on a civil background check for civil history, which is generally evictions, we just say no thank you. We have other people interested in the property. That's our standard. When it comes to criminal history, well, this one is also no good. No criminal history either. That means no felonies. Now, there is a little bit of kind of debate in the fair housing world about, can you just say no felonies, or do you have to be more specific than that? This isn't a fair housing class. I'm not going to get into all the specifics about it. But basically, our rule is, no violent felonies, no burglary, nothing that's going to make any of our neighbors feel unsafe, any of our staff feel unsafe. Now, there's things like misdemeanors as well. Generally, we're saying no to most misdemeanors too, especially if there's more than one. We will allow a couple of things. Maybe one misdemeanor we'll allow sometimes. There is one felony we have allowed in the past, that is a DUI. Generally, I don't like to allow that either. Everything else has to look very clean. But usually a DUI says, one, it's a lot of expenses. A lot of people have to go to jail over it. It's very expensive. Probably don't have the best judgment. There are, people who just make one stupid decision with it and they can keep their life together. So in rare cases, if everything else has checked out really well, that's kind of the only felony we've ever really approved before. But misdemeanors, most of those we're not going to accept. Again, if they're willing to break the law or they have a history of breaking the law, why aren't they going to break the rules of your lease? Your lease isn't as big as the law, so why are they going to care about the rules of your lease if they don't even care about the laws of the United States or Missouri or whatever it is? So you're going to be the law in this situation, so you want them to basically follow your rules here. So just stay away from those things. I would rather keep the property vacant than basically compromise on those. Now when it comes to income, basically, we require 3 times the amount of rent in verifiable income. What does verifiable income mean? It means we have to be able to prove that you make it in some way. If you make it under the table, it doesn't count. That doesn't matter. If you say you make it in tips but you don't report it, no, that doesn't count either. It needs to be on a W-2 or tax return or 1099 of some kind. We have to be able to verify that you're actually making this kind of income. I'm sorry if you make a bunch of money under the table. You can rent from someone else who's going to, take that risk. Again, we have our standards. We're going to hit 80%. We're going to miss out on some great residents. There was one guy, I remember this, he got really mad at us because he basically said he was a multimillionaire and it was ridiculous that we wouldn't rent to him. But the reason is because he didn't have any income he could verify with us with like a W-2 or anything. He said he owned a business. So we said, okay, give us your tax returns. We can see how much money you make. He said, no, I can't give you my tax returns because it's confidential and I'm worried about my business partners, giving away their information and stuff like that. And it was like, okay, that's fine. You don't have to give us that information, but we have our standard. We're probably missing out on a good resident because he has no real reason to lie to us. But again, we're going to miss out on some really good calls. Go ahead.
What if a guy like that would give you a year's rent in advance?
Generally, I don't like to take a bunch of money in advance. We have done it before. But in this kind of situation, we probably would be willing to do that if we could verify everything else, because the lease has already been paid for at that point. And if their credit and background and all that kind of stuff checks out, the income is kind of mute because the only kind of thing they might have to pay us would be damages to the property or if they renewed the lease or something like that. So in this kind of situation, everything else checked out good, we probably would accept it. Generally, I don't like those kind of deals. This is kind of making a side deal that you always kind of have to negotiate with people. I try to stay away from that stuff, partly because it just becomes too much. There's so much to do already, like I showed you before. If you start making all these side deals with all your residents, you're just going to make some bad calls because you're not thinking everything through straight. Just make it so you have a good standard that's going to win 80% of the time, and things are going to work really well. You're going to miss out on some good opportunities, but you're not going to have to make as many decisions. You're going to know that it's going to work. You don't have to think as hard. You're not going to make as many mistakes on things. You're just going to have a system that works, and you just have to work the system. When it comes to income, another thing we really like to see, but we've noticed we can't, this is not something we can really require in the climate of the rentals that we have in Kansas City, is a lot of people really like to have a year of employment history as well. We don't actually require that. We look for it, and it kind of goes into our whole formula of what we do. But the rentals we've noticed we can't consistently get people who have a full year at the same job to rent our property. There's too many people who don't fit that. So we have to take a little bit of a gamble with that. People have a little bit less stable careers. Maybe they move jobs around a lot. Maybe they've gotten fired recently and they just got back on their feet. So who knows if this is a long-term job for them. That's one of the places where I made a concession because we just couldn't find enough residents who had that consistent job history, so that's one of the concessions we did make. When it comes to rental history, we ask for 1 year plus of verified rental history. This is probably the place where we have the biggest pushback from residents, or prospects, I guess would be the correct term, about them not being able to rent from us because they didn't get their rental history to us. It's not always easy to obtain rental history. Like Kim said, Rent Perfect, is that what it was? They don't make the calls. You need to either yourself or have a company, which Red Star Backgrounds does for us, actually make the phone calls, send the faxes, get the written documentation that this person rented from a place, didn't have any bad history, what the rent was, what the address was, verify all this information, make sure it actually occurred. We really like to go past 1 year if possible. We try to go back as far as we can. Generally, it's going to be very difficult to get more than just the previous landlord. That's another concession we've had to make that we don't want to, but going back to the landlord before their current one or the one even before that is just, you don't find it very often. You end up screening out a bunch of quality residents because you're just being too nitpicky about it. So we need 1 year of positive rental history, and it has to be verified. If they can't get it into us, they say, my landlord just is mad at me because I'm moving. So they won't give rental history. I've heard that one a lot. Sorry, if we don't have it on file, we can't use it. You might be a great resident. You might be telling us the truth, but we've just figured that taking that risk isn't worth it for our company. We can find the resident who doesn't have that risk attached to them. One of the reasons we get this is because we want to make sure that they pay on time consistently. We actually have a formula for this. We allow 1 late payment per year in their rental history. This flows really closely with our delinquency policies, which I get into. We allow 1 payment arrangement per 12-month lease, which basically is 1 late pay per year. So if they have 3 years of rental history and 5 late payments over that 3 years between 2 different landlords, they're not going to get approved with us. They just have too much history of delinquency with their previous landlords. If they have 7 years of rental history and they pay late 3 times, okay, we'll take that. And they might have, just had a couple of lapses, or they had a couple of bad months, or a couple of transitions, or whatever. But over 7 years, we can probably make that work. That's a risk we're willing to take there. It's not really a big one, honestly. Other things like complaints about residents, things like that, we take those into account as well. Any damages left behind or balances owed, those kind of things can't exist. So you have to have positive rental history, not rental history. Another issue that this one really causes, this is one of the hardest ones to achieve and to get, so it delays applications a lot. And new landlords, I see this mistake happen a lot. They give on this one a lot because they can't obtain the rental reference and the person needs to move in by Wednesday. Sorry. You got it right there. Brandon, is that your name? Yes, sorry. That's the greatest way. That's the greatest way to say it. We need the rental reference before we can approve you. We're not willing to take that risk. We'll let the property go vacant, go rent somewhere else. I'm sorry you only have 48 hours to move. I didn't put you in that situation. So I'm not going to feel guilty. I'm not going to let you make me feel guilty. So I say rental history is one of the hardest ones to obtain. I see new landlords make concessions on that a lot, and I see it just come back to bite them all the time. And they make concessions on all this stuff at different times, and it really hurts me to see because, again, your air filter is your most important part. It's a ridiculous analogy on purpose because it's supposed to make a weird connection in your brain so you actually remember it. And actually, I'm going to hand some of these out after the break as gifts so that some of you really remember it. Credit. Generally, if you have a 600 plus credit score, I'm fine with you. Unless you have like a bankruptcy or something really obvious, then we might have to reconsider. We don't allow bankruptcies and stuff like that, but usually you're not going to have a 600 plus credit score if you have bankruptcy. Typically, a bank's going to loan on you to buy a house if you have plus 600 credit score, so I think that's good enough for us to rent a property to you as well. Now, if it's below 400 or below 500, you're done at that point. We're not even going to really have a discussion about it. There's a gray area between 500 and 600. And this gets really into the weeds about things. You're probably going to have to develop your own way to do this. You can't really just copy someone else's. Now, having no credit score, I think technically no credit score is like a 524 or something like that. We will allow people with no credit. They have to really check out well on everything else. They can't have any other that's kind of the thing where if they have like a misdemeanor and no credit and they just have barely 1 year of rental history or something like that, that's probably going to be worth too many things. Go ahead.
So what sort of data do you look for to replace
We don't really look to replace it with anything. It just everything else needs to check out really well. So if they have all the other stuff and they don't have anything really negative on their credit, some people just don't live in a credit world or live a credit lifestyle of any kind. So that's, again, it's not what we want to see, but it's a concession we're willing to make. We feel like that's a risk we can generally handle. We don't replace it with anything necessarily. It's just the other stuff needs to really look clean and look good. If you have, you know, if everything's kind of on the edge, like you barely make enough money, we have some formulas behind this, but I'm not going to get into all the formulas we have for everything. But you barely make enough money, you have, you know, some small misdemeanors on your background, you know, you just have 1 year of rental history with one late payment and you had a complaint about noise. It's too much stuff. Without the credit, we're not going to be able to preview. Now, it kind of gets into the thing. It looks really simple when you're looking at it like this, of just like one person's background moving into a house. It isn't that simple. And you really need to figure out a lot of different scenarios of who you're going to approve and who you're not going to approve. Because if you have a house with 3 bedrooms, you might rent it to a family with a husband and a wife who have basically the same credit score, same income, everything like that, but you might rent it to 3 roommates. And honestly, you're not allowed to discriminate. It doesn't matter which one comes to you, you have to treat them both the same. Now, what if one roommate has 2 years of rental history, but the other one has none? Do you require all your residents to have rental history? Or is that one person's rental history good enough for the whole group? What if one person has an eviction, but there's 3 other people on the lease that don't? How are you going to handle that situation? What if one person, you know, if everybody's starting a new job, is that something you want? So there's a lot of weird situations you get into with multiple groups and things like that. We always simplify it ourselves. Everybody always applies as a group, and they're screened as a group. Any evictions, any felonies for the entire group, no go. Even if there's 6 people who are applying, that will just kill the entire application. If those people want to move in, they have to reapply as a new group with new people. So that whole group gets declined, or not approved is the word that we use. And then, you know, if they actually want to move in because they don't want that one person with the eviction to move anymore, they have to have the same 5 people apply again with a new 6th person, and that's a new group that we're going to measure. It's how we do it. Again, it's cumbersome. It's a little bit difficult. But it's the whole assembly line philosophy of we're just going to push people through this system. You have to fit into how we do things. It's going to be a little bit hard. But if they don't really want the house and they're kind of flaky and stuff like that, they're going to be flaky when they live there. And so you can figure that you can kind of screen some of those people out almost in that way of just making it a little bit more difficult for them to go through the process in that case. So there's a lot of different variants of how things can go with roommate groups and you know, one spouse being having all the rental history and the other one not. We don't require everybody to have rental history. One person's rental history can work for the entire household. Credit, we usually average it out between the roommates. So if there's one person with 480 credit score and another person with 720, we're going to average it and see that works out pretty well. One person's credit score isn't going to take the whole, but these are rules you kind of have to figure out for yourself what works for you, what kind of rentals you have. We've made it easy for ourselves, and we just have the same criteria across the board. And I mean, we had a property on 26th and Van Brunt, which isn't the highest end area of town, and we have properties in Prairie Village and some nice places, and we use the same basic criteria for all of it. And so we've kind of just tried to simplify it. And so we had to have a wide range of stuff. But if you only do really high-end stuff, you might be able to get away with stuff that we can't. If you only do lower-end stuff, you might have to take some more risks that we're not willing to take. But 1, because of fair housing, make it very consistent. And 2, just do what works for you and tinker with it. There's also some other things you can do. We have a couple of unique situations. I mean, you can have co-signers come alongside people. We really only use co-signers for people who don't make enough income or don't have any rental history. That's kind of the exception we use for co-signers. They kind of borrow their co-signers' credit worthiness in that kind of situation. Also, if someone, this is kind of a weird thing, but we have kind of an entry level where you can rent a cheap apartment and pay last month's rent if you don't have any rental history, but everything else checks out really well. It's kind of a way for some people to get into cheap properties if they have no one willing to co-sign for them, but everything else looks really good. We still want them to be able to rent a property of some kind. So we have a couple of unique situations, but those are kind of things you have to figure out for yourself of how you want to do it. And we don't have a lot of them. They're just very particular, but there are some ways to get more people approved with co-signers or last month's rent. But generally, my advice is higher criteria than you would before. Filter the air in your house. So going back to all the nuts and bolts of property management, I spend a lot of time on screening because if there's one thing you leave here, that's the one thing you just got to do right. If you don't get that right, you're not gonna like property management very much. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. I'm just gonna overload you if I go over all this stuff. You're not gonna remember any of it. It's gonna be too much. So I just kind of took a couple of things, and I basically made a little map that we can kind of jump back to, jump out of, jump back into, and of some of the kind of topics I'm going to cover. If there's other things you guys want to cover, maybe think about it. We're going to take a break in a second. Maybe think about it. We can talk about that as much as you guys want. But I picked some topics that I thought were important. So some things before renting: make-readies, marketing and showings, leasing, screening. It's a big part of this whole thing. While you're renting, you got rent collection, customer service, maintenance, record keeping. So this is kind of the map I'm going to use for the second half of the presentation. I'm going to kind of zoom into it, zoom back out, so you can kind of have some perspective where we're at with things. But generally, this is kind of what we're talking about. There's so much more, like I said, to property management, but these are some of the kind of big overarching topics I hope I can give you some wisdom on that you guys can use and actually help your property management abilities. So there's kind of three outcomes you can have while renting a property. Now, this is kind of poker terms in a sense, but if you do renting well, you can win, you can draw, or you can lose. You can win the pot, you can split the pot, or you can lose the pot, is kind of how I say it. Now, kind of how this goes is you win if they renew with you. That's where you really make your money. If you do this stuff well, if you make a good property make-ready, you collect rent well, you have good customer service, good maintenance, good record keeping, and you're going to win and you're going to renew the lease generally. A normal move-out would be kind of like a tie. It's not really what you want, but if someone just has a normal, clean move-out, it's not going to ruin you. You're going to be okay generally. You're not going to make a ton of money if you have tons of move-outs all the time, but you're not going to go broke either. It's a lot of work to deal with move-outs. It's very frustrating, but you're generally going to be okay in that situation. Losing would be eviction, or messy move-outs, or random in the middle of the night move-outs, all sorts of kind of stuff like that. That's the kind of stuff you want to avoid. That's the stuff you really can't make a profit if it's happening a lot. So how well you do this stuff is going to kind of define how you end up on your journey with property management. So we're going to take a quick 5-minute break, maybe about 7 minutes, come back about 12, just to stretch a little bit, maybe think of some questions you guys have. I have some prizes that are going to be so awesome when you guys get back. So yeah, I appreciate it. Take a look at a little stretch break. I have a couple of gifts to give out. William, for asking some questions during the break, I want to give you a brand new air filter. Thank you. Brandon, you had a really good question as well. Congratulations on your new air filters, guys. I think that's awesome. Again, this is supposed to be ridiculous because you're supposed to remember it. Doesn't make any sense that I'm comparing air filters to screening residents, but because of that, hopefully you'll remember the fact that you have to do that. A leopard doesn't change its spots. The resident who moves into your property is the same person who's going to move out of your property. They're not going to change that much. So if they're not paying rent before they move into your property, they're not going to pay rent when they do move into your property. If you can't verify that they paid rent before they moved in, you don't know that they're going to pay rent when they actually do live there. So, okay. So here's that map again. I got a quick question for you. What's the most important part in property management? Screening. I was hoping somebody did it first because I was going to give them another prize, but oh well. You're right. Okay, screening. So we're going to talk about screening first. How about that? Just a quick recap here. Okay, so there's Good screening and bad screening. This is how you feel when you do good screening. This is how you feel when you do bad screening. Just a quick recap. I'm going to pound that in your head this whole time because it's very, very important. So let's go back to our little map here so we can jump around a little bit and talk about other aspects. So I'm going to talk about make ready. That's kind of getting your property ready to be rented. This is also very important. Andrew kind of went over some of this already. He kind of took a different angle at it, which is nice. So you can kind of see a little bit of our inner workings about the checklist that we have and kind of the smart sheet that you look at. We do that for every single vacancy. So when it comes to make ready, you got to do some basic stuff. You got to paint it. You got to fix window blinds. Sometimes you don't have a sink faucet. That's kind of a problem. Trash everywhere. If you're not doing this stuff, you got no hope. This is just the easy stuff you got to do, and you can't rent a property that looks like any of these things here. That's pretty obvious. What people make a mistake on is that the details really do matter. What's wrong with this outlet cover right here, or this outlet? Yeah, it's dirty. It's kind of a small thing. I don't like the style, but the style's whatever. But there's paint on the outlet cover. Now, okay, whatever. But really, I can get that off with my fingernail. It's just how much do you care? It doesn't cost any more money. It's just how much do you care? When someone walks into a property and they see stuff like that, they might not even notice it. They might not be able to point it out. But it just feels worse. It feels not cared for. It feels not good. So those kind of things really do change the perception of your rental property. Now, what's wrong with this outlet right here? Yeah, exactly. Now, you might have two outlets on the walls that don't match in color. Actually, we have that right here with this one, the cable outlet with the white switches over there. It doesn't match. Now, again, it's not a huge deal, but it's $2.50 to replace that outlet cover and make it match? I even know how to do that one. I can do that. Now, maybe you have to switch the outlet out because all the other outlets in the room are white. But again, that's not a lot of money. That's not the really challenging part here. That's pretty easy. It just shows how much you care, how much you're actually looking at these things, how well you're able to put this stuff together consistently. When someone walks into a house and it's all mismatched outlets and stuff like that, it doesn't feel put together. They don't care about this property. If they don't care about the property now, are they going to care about it when I live in there and I really need to trust these guys if they're going to fix stuff? I just don't trust them. So it's those little things that really matter. One of the biggest things that really matters when you're putting a house together is cleaning it. Super important. Most people, I feel like, don't really know how to clean, I guess. When you're cleaning a house, don't just clean inside the refrigerator and stuff like that. Actually move the refrigerator and clean out behind it. Open the windows and clean the actual windows, not just some stuff on the inside. A lot of the dirt's on the outside or in the windowsills or things like that. Do the detailed things. Talking about outlets again, dirt likes to accumulate at the top of the outlet, like right here. This one's actually dirty right here. Clean that dirt. It feels so much cleaner when those little things are taken care of. Now, one little tip when it comes to cleaning. The reason I have Mr. Clean up here, they are not a sponsor, no. I'm not that famous. But Mr. Clean has a very good product. Their magic erasers are magic erasers. Those are awesome products. They can clean tons of walls, tons of appliances. Our cleaners use them all the time. I can't remember what the material is called. It's like melanome or something like that. I can't remember. It's actually really cheap stuff, but I love the Mr. Clean brand because they're really durable and strong and you can really scrub with them. They work really well for cleaning. So if you're going to clean it or you're going to get a cleaner, get those Mr. Clean magic erasers. They're really, really helpful for cleaning properties. Go ahead.
Do you think usually you hire a company to do it or you have people on staff for it?
We have technically contractors, but they basically work full-time for us. They don't technically work full-time for us, but they always have jobs from us that they're doing. They do have other clients as well, but we have so much cleaning going on all the time. They're working for us all the time. They're pretty close to employees. And we have really high standards, and we tell them exactly how to clean our houses sometimes, or not exactly how to clean them, but what the expectations are when cleaning them. So they're pretty close to full-time employees in that sense of just they're always doing properties for us. They really know what our standards are. One guy's cleaned probably 300 of our houses at this point. So I've actually learned most of my cleaning knowledge from him. So we got really lucky finding him. So the details really matter. Here's another detail. Now, this is the same room 3 different times. On the left, it looks really sterile, kind of like a hospital, just like an office. It just doesn't look good. The middle's kind of in between. And on the right, it looks very warm and inviting. And yeah, just the color of the light bulbs will change the look of a house. Use soft white light bulbs for welcome home feeling. Soft white is the color to use. It's kind of more actually a yellow color, but whenever we actually tell anybody who's working on our houses what color light bulbs to use, and also make sure that they all match throughout the house. It really changes the look when you have a bright white one with a soft white one in the same fixture. It just looks really dumb. But the color of the light bulb is going to change the feel of the house. And again, it's not something someone who's looking at the house is really going to be able to necessarily name, but they're going to feel. And people generally make those kind of big decisions based off of emotion, not on logic all the time. You're still going to be able to rent the house if you get these things wrong a lot of times. Some people just need to move and they need a place at this price in this area. Yeah, but you're trying to go above and beyond that. And I'll get to some of the reasons why. So there's a lot of work to do when it comes to turning over property. Andrew kind of showed you, but we have a checklist, and I actually counted it out. And between our smallest units and our biggest units, we go through 119 to 282 different items every time someone moves out and check them off. It's a lot of things to do. Whenever something's wrong, we write it down, take a picture. And sometimes it's more than one. If it's a door stop or something that we're looking at, sometimes there's 2 doors in a room, so we're actually checking it twice. Speaking of which, when you're doing this checklist for a house, something you need to remember. You remember Santa Claus when you're turning over a house. Now, why should you remember Santa Claus?
Check it twice.
I spoiled it, didn't I? Yes, check it twice. That doesn't mean go through that entire list, 119 or 282 items twice. What it means is you need to check your list twice, make it Santa approved, which means you've checked it twice. Basically, you go to a house, you check off all of these items, all the details, all the outlets are in place, all the sink faucets work, everything is cleaned. You make sure everything is up to your standard. Everything that's not, you write down, you put in a smart sheet like Andrew said. We always take a picture of every single thing wrong for a variety of reasons. But you get pictures of all of it, and then what you do is you send someone to go repair it, or you do it yourself, either one. But once you fixed it, you go back to the house and check to make sure every single thing is done. You need to verify that all the stuff was either done originally or the stuff that was wrong got fixed correctly. Don't trust the contractor or an employee or anybody that they just did it right and it's up to your standard. Again, it's not their house. They don't care about it as much as you. You need to have a standard. You need to make sure everybody's hitting that standard. So make sure it's Santa approved, check their work, double check it. We call it a quality check. We quality check the work of everybody who touches their house, and we don't ever rent a house until it's either been checked off on the original check for every single one of those items, or someone fixed it and we checked it off on the quality check. We often send someone to the property 3 times before we rent it out. Once to do the initial inspection with that long checklist Andrew quickly wrote, make a list of everything wrong. We send a maintenance person or a contractor to the property. They fix all the main stuff. We go check off their work. Then we send the cleaner, and then the cleaner goes and cleans everything, and then we go back to check off the cleaner's work. That's also when we happen to take the pictures. That's just a convenience thing, but that's also the best time because everything's really clean and sparkly at that point, hopefully. So that's kind of how we do it. We don't always have to go 3 times. We have some cleaners who can do some basic construction work, which is really helpful. So we just send one person who knows how to clean the property, and they can put in the light bulbs and fix that one towel rack and stuff like that. So sometimes it's only twice if it's not that big of a job. But if it's ever a big turnover we have to do, we go there 3 times to check it the first time and check it twice and make sure every item that was touched is checked that second time to make sure it was done correctly. So more screening. going through applications is not the only way to screen residents. I kind of briefly mentioned one. If you make your process kind of cumbersome, this isn't really a great thing to do. We have made our process a little bit cumbersome, but that screens out kind of flaky people. People who don't show up to appointments, people who don't fill out applications. They don't rent from us because they can't get through our process because they just don't work hard enough to get through it. We automatically filter people through that. It's not really on purpose. It's just kind of how our system works. But another way to screen is, okay, so let's say you have a kitchen like this. It's a pretty nice kitchen. I would like that kitchen. It's better than my kitchen. Or you could have a kitchen like this. Okay, so who's going to rent this kitchen here? I don't know. Maybe someone like Mr. Rogers? I think he would like that kitchen, right? Yeah, I could see him fitting there, you know, nice in the neighborhood. He's a good neighbor. Anybody would love to rent to Mr. Rogers, and I think he'd be very happy renting this kitchen. Now, who would rent this kitchen? I don't think Mr. Rogers is going to rent that kitchen. It's not a good neighborhood right there. Maybe these guys? They need a kitchen to do some stuff, right? I don't really want to rent to them, though. Who would you rather rent to? I think it's pretty easy. You put together a nice property, you're going to attract, you know, nice residents. It's just kind of the simple fact. You're not going to attract people who are super messy in general to a super clean house. Again, it's kind of this odds thing. You're on average going to get cleaner people and higher class people in a nicer property that was put together well. You're going to, at the very least, people who are very clean aren't going to rent a dirty property, so you're going to miss out on that really clean resident at the bare minimum. So just doing that really helps you, again, get a higher class of residents. So that was going over make-readies and stuff like that. Next, let's go over marketing and showing. So there's so much with all this stuff. Oh, go ahead.
Before you move on, the screening, do you ever do a walkthrough of where people live currently before you do a final approval?
No, we do not. I have heard of, that's kind of another one of these extra things I've heard of people do. It's just, it would be so much energy with the operation we have going to keep track of that and stuff like that. It'd be really hard to make that part of our just assembly line process of the same thing happening over and over and over again. I realize you guys don't necessarily have to have that same assembly line philosophy because you don't have as many rentals as we do. I kind of encourage people to have that philosophy because if you want to grow, you're going to have to get there anyways. And also it's just going to make your life easier. If you're always making side deals and stuff like that and going with these kind of extra things, it's just going to clog your mind and you're going to constantly having to figure out, you know, who you're doing what for and stuff like that. So I just think it's a better way to manage property. I don't have time to go in my big philosophical soapbox at this point in time. But anyways, we don't do that. I have heard of people doing that. I'm sure it would be effective. It just would be, it's a lot of work to do stuff like that. Now, if you only have one house and one rental and you got to make this thing work, I can understand going above and beyond and stuff like that. But once you start getting to 5, 10, 15, 20, it's going to be really hard to keep that up. So, okay, so back to our little map here, marketing and showing. So I'm just going to go over kind of one real part. There's so much with all of this stuff. I feel kind of guilty giving this presentation because I feel like I'm skipping over so much important stuff and I'm really just scratching the surface and I can't even really convince you very well some of the stuff I am talking about. But there's a thought of marketing of just, you know, you get so there's this law in economics. It's really fancy. I think they teach in like Econ 405 advanced level economics. It's called supply and demand. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's kind of theoretical. They're not really sure if it actually exists or no. This is basic economics, supply and demand. You need to make this work in your favor when you're doing marketing. Your supply, what is your supply when you're renting a house? It's one house. There is no house like that house. Even if the next door house is exactly the same, it's not in the same location. Apartment buildings might be a little bit different. You have a lot of fairly similar stuff, but the general principle, if you stretch it just a little bit, it still works. So when it comes to economics, supply and demand is the way to go. So a lot of people look at renting a house like this. You got a house, 123 Main Street, beautiful house. I love that house, just as good as that kitchen we had before. You want to rent it for $1. John comes by, he rents it for $1. Great, we got it rented. All we had to do was put a sign in the yard. We got our guy, he's renting the house, everybody's happy. You really shouldn't think that way. Now, it's very important to move quickly. Every day a house is vacant, it's costing you a lot of money, so you want to get it quickly. But what if instead of one person in the first week, you get 10 people looking at the house in the first week? Well, okay, well, here's John. He only wants to rent the house for $1, but you also got Jane here. She only wants to rent the house for $1. You got Samantha. Well, she really wants it. She's willing to rent it for $2. And you got, I don't know, Austin. He only wants it for $1. And you got whoever wants to rent it for $2. You get how this works. So you get 10 people here. They all secretly are willing to pay a different amount of money for the house. I realize $1 for a house makes no sense. It just makes this a little bit easier to understand. So you got 10 people. They all have their own price in their head of what they're willing to pay. So if you rent it for $1, you just rent it to John for $1. But what if you raised it to $2, but instead of just putting a sign in the yard and getting one person to look at it, you put in a little bit of work. You got 10 people to look at it in the first week. Well, you rent it for $2. Well, all these people don't want it. Well, that's fine. It doesn't matter. Who cares about John? We can rent to these 4 people still. We're fine. We're assuming all these people have already been screened and approved. Maybe 20 people looked at the house, and these are the people who actually got approved. Well, what if you rent it for $3? Okay. Well, these 9 people don't want it, but this person does. I just tripled my rent. That was pretty easy. Now, obviously, you're not going to triple your rent, but the idea boiled down is pretty simple. If you get more people, the supply remains the same. It's one house. If you have one person looking at it, there's just one person who demands your house. But if you have 10 people, the demand goes up. What happens if the supply stays the same and the demand goes up? The price goes up. It's the basic laws of economics. It's one of the most basic things in this world. So you want to make the demand for your house as high as possible by getting as many people looking at it who are qualified and eventually pass your screening criteria as possible. So there's this brand new invention. I don't know if you've heard of it. I keep spoiling my things because I can't look at the next slide like I practiced. But anyways, there's this brand new invention out there. I don't know if you've heard about it. World Wide Web, the internet. It's pretty fancy. You can do some cool stuff with it. This is the best place to market your properties. There's a lot of places to market your rentals. There's Trulia and Zillow. If you have apartments.com, HotPads, there's a ton of them. It takes too much time and energy to rent all of these places, or to post on all these places. So the best thing to do is to get an aggregator. The one we first used was called RentLinks. I believe it's still free if you only have a couple of properties. That might have changed recently. I know it used to be free for everybody all the time. They started charging us because of how many properties we had on there. But I think it's still free on the lower levels. I don't know that for sure. But basically, if you put your property on RentLinks, it'll post it out to all these rental postings out there, and you're going to get a lot of eyeballs on your property. There's a couple other ones that you can use. ShowMojo is actually what we use. There's also Rently.com. They do similar stuff. There's other sites that do similar stuff to this of you put it there and you get a lot of eyes. You want to try to generate as much traffic. Don't just put a sign in the yard and say, I got someone to come over and see it, and they rented it and I'm happy. Again, you want to create demand for your one house. If you rent a house for $1,000, great. If you rent it for $1,100, it's $1,200 more a year. That's a lot of money. But what people always fail to realize with these rent increases is that $1,000 isn't $1,000 of profit. That $1,000 is $1,000 of revenue, which has to pay all your expenses, your mortgage, your maintenance, your vacancy, all that stuff. That last $100, there's no expense tied to that. That's pure profit. That's the purest revenue you're ever going to generate. It's the most important revenue. So you really want to drive up the demand and rent properties for as much as you realistically can while realizing you're under time pressure, because every single day it goes vacant for a $1,000 rental, you're spending $33 a day keeping that place empty.
In your example of the $1, $2, and $3, are you saying you kind of create an auction of sorts, or do you just set the price and then you want to get as many people out there so one person will bite at that price?
The second thing you said is correct. I didn't make that very clear. No, we don't sell. We don't act like a seller, like we're selling this house. We don't create an auction. I've definitely thought about it before and almost started doing it at one point. But The idea is we know we're going to generate a lot of traffic by how much energy we're going to put into marketing these properties and getting people to look at them. And so we know we're going to get those 10 people in that first week, and we're going to find that one person who's willing to pay $3. That's the idea. Now, we might not find that person in the first week. We might misprice it. But the idea is that we know we're generating enough traffic. We can charge a higher rental price than if we just all we do is put a sign in the yard, wait for that one person to call, hope they're the person who wants to pay $3. Otherwise, we're waiting forever. They're more likely the person who's willing to pay $1, and then we just have to settle for a lower rental price. So there's someone in this city who's willing to pay more than anybody else for your house. You're probably not going to find that person, but you can find someone who's going to pay more than the other guy by really putting some effort to make sure that they see your house. So just don't be lazy with that aspect of it. Now, when it comes to Show Mojo and Rently, there's this new thing out there, these lock boxes. Has anybody ever tried these kind of, yeah, a couple people have. So they're actually pretty nice. I believe Rently charges $30 a month for them, if I'm not correct. We use Show Mojo, and we actually just outright bought the boxes from them. I think it was only like, it was under $100 for the boxes. It wasn't expensive, I think. It was really cheap, and I think we pay like $1 or $2 a month to keep them activated. But I don't think you should get rid of the idea of a leasing agent or showing people the properties. I think there's a lot of value in it. I think a lot of people only will rent a property if you're actually willing to show it to them and stuff like that. But for when you're not available, for weekends, we're closed on the weekends, we're closed after hours. These are great ways to get people to be able to see those properties when they're off work. You know, and that might be when you don't want to show because you're spending time with your family, or for us, we don't have the ability to show because all our people are not working when other people are working. We don't use these after hours. There's still some liability with them. They're not perfect. They're actually pretty good at keeping your property secure. I've been pretty surprised. We don't let people view our properties when it's dark outside because we just don't think that's a great idea. But it's really great if they want to see it a second time too after they've already, that's what we actually see the most is they want to see it a second time and not have to schedule with us to do it, or they want to show their spouse. They were able to look at it, they loved it, but they want their spouse to sign off on it. So they'll go check out with these boxes, or a roommate or something like that. They're really nice to have. I was a little bit against them at first, and I just made the wrong call. These are really good things to have, in my opinion. So going back to our little map here, I'm actually going to skip leasing for right now. We're going to go down to rent collection. So rent collection, how should you think about rent collection? Well, how does the bank deal with collecting a mortgage? They don't really have any emotions about it generally. They just say, you owe us money, pay us the money. Now there are mortgage, what is it called when you, modifications and stuff like that. So they're not 100% strict, but generally it's kind of a faceless, emotionless transaction where they just expect you to pay the money. If you don't pay the money, they're eventually going to foreclose on you. And if you lost your job, they generally don't really think about it too much. Again, unless they do a loan modification, which isn't really that common either. But the biggest thing to do is, like the bank, have a process. Know how you're going to do this. Don't just throw caution in the wind and go, oh, this person didn't pay, I'm in trouble all of a sudden. No, have a plan going in, have a process, and follow that process. Stick to that process. Because someone went to the hospital, because someone went to jail, because someone's cousin is sick, because they're out of town, you have a process. You need to stick to that process and don't do it. Again, this is an assembly line thing. It's going to work most of the time. Some good residents are going to fall through the cracks, and you're going to end up in a bad situation that you could have saved if you listened to their sob story. But you know what? It's just not worth it. It's so much energy. It's so much stress. You're going to get screwed over a couple of times, so don't do it. Money won't come in on its own. Now, this is where I think you should act a little bit different than the bank. You have to actually work for it. You're dealing with generally a less wealthy class of people when they're renting rather than owning houses. They don't really want to give up a third of their income to you every month to pay rent. If they didn't pay rent, they probably have a reason they didn't pay rent. Don't expect it to just come in eventually when it didn't come in on time. If they didn't pay it on time, they really aren't going to want to pay it with a late fee attached to it. So you're going to have to work for it. I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. And also don't compromise. Again, you're going to hear a lot of sob stories. You're going to have people say, well, if you just, give me an extra week on this thing, I'll get it to you. If I give you half now, I'll do it later. If you have a process, that is your process and stick to it. Now, your process doesn't have to be 100% rigid. I'll get into that in a second. But anyways, this is what our process is. We've actually had basically the same process for about 4 years now, and we obviously evict a decent amount of people, but we have a lot of renters. We probably evict, I don't know, recently it's been like 0.5% of... Yeah, it's not a lot of people that we evict out of 450 residents or whatever we have. So our process is pretty simple, and we explain this to them very clearly. I'll get into that in a second. But rent is due on the 1st. It's pretty simple. It's actually late on the 2nd. Now, we don't actually charge a late fee until the 5th, and I explained very clearly, 11:59 p.m. on the 4th is the last time we can see rent without a late fee attached to it. As soon as your phone says it's the 5th of the month, that late fee is there, and there's nothing I can do to get rid of it. Doesn't matter if it was technically our fault because our website was down. You had 3 days to pay. It was late on the 2nd. So why didn't you try to check our website on the 2nd and realize it was down and then drop it off at our office or give us a call when we were open on the 3rd? A lot of people pay us late on July 4th because we're closed on July 4th, and they think, oh, they're closed, I'll just come in on the 5th, it's not a big deal. Sorry, your phone said the 5th. It's late. You've got to pay the late fee at this point. Once the 5th hits, we start working to collect that money. We send a phone call. Now, this is not an aggressive conversation. This is just checking up on them. We want to know what's going on. Did you think you paid? We're not knocking down their door. Where's our rent money? That's not going to get you anywhere. They're not going to pay you because you're mean. It's just not going to happen. They either have the money or they don't. They either are okay getting evicted or they're not. If you got the right leopard, they're not okay getting evicted, and they'll figure it out. So we start sending a phone call on the 6th. We also send them a letter. We send them a text message. We just want to get in communication with them to let them know, hey, if you don't pay, this is going to get worse. So what's going on? We can't necessarily change it exactly, but we want to make sure you know what's happening. Because on the 12th, we send out 72-hour notices. We post these on their front door. We drive all around town to post these. And then on the 15th, we file eviction. There's only one exception I will get into in a second, but that's just the process. If you get paid on the 16th, I'm sorry. You got to figure it out. We're not going to make exceptions for you because then we have to make exceptions for everybody. It's a lot of work to do that. This process, if you have a good air filter, this process is going to generally get you your money, get your rent paid. Now, there's one exception like I talked about, and I briefly mentioned this earlier. We allow one payment plan every 12 months. We realize bad things happen to good residents. We want to basically, be able to handle those bumps. Again, this is an assembly line, but we don't have to be so rigid in that assembly line. We can create an extra part that helps the car work better long term. But this is kind of our way to kind of cover that. We have parameters around that payment plan. Basically, they pick the dates that they're going to pay the rent. It all has to be paid up by the next month. We don't get rid of late fees. Late fees still are attached. And if you've already used your payment plan and you get paid on the 17th the next month, we're going to file for eviction. It's how we do things. You can cry about it, you can yell about it, but it's our job to just follow that process. That's all we have to do. Go ahead.
What if they pay including attorney's fees at that point, you're allowed to say?
Yes, we do. That's kind of what we communicate to people. As soon as that eviction is filed, we add $500 charge to their account, which is basically our legal fees plus some of our employees' time. And if they pay that $500 plus their back rent plus their late fees, we'll let them stay in the property at that point. Typically, I don't have a lot of hope for those situations. They typically don't last that much longer anyways. We've had people, get evicted, pay it all back, get evicted, pay it all back 3 or 4 times, then finally they get evicted and we end up having to kick them out. That's usually how it ends up going. Yep.
So this one payment plan every 12 months, when do they revert back to the first of the month? So say, for instance, if I was late in, what is this month, March? right?
Yeah, so basically, that's a simplified way of saying every lease that they sign with us, they get one payment plan. So technically, if someone, let's say they signed a 12-month lease from January to December, and they had a payment plan in November, but they renewed their lease with us again in January all of a sudden, they could use their payment plan in February if they wanted to. Basically, every lease, that's a one-year lease they sign with us, we give them one payment plan. We don't give them a second one, we don't keep doing payment, we just do that one for their entire lease. Again, we understand things happen. A lot of people are living paycheck to paycheck. We want to build in some kind of catch for a lot of these people who are doing that, who are actually really trying. This is our way of doing that. It really makes a lot of good residents. We don't evict many good residents because they're not going to have more than one hiccup or they'll figure it out.
So is this spelled out in the terms of the lease in the payment section or a policy? Or
It is not in the lease anywhere. We have a piece of paper we give people to explain this as a policy. We are not forced to give a payment plan because we don't want to tie ourselves to that. Generally, we've never really denied one before. We don't really see a reason to do that. We give some people some information about it. And basically, I'll get into this a little bit more later if I have time, but when we sign a lease with someone, we sit down with them and we go over exactly what happens if they're going to miss rent. So they know when we sign the lease with them, this is what's going to happen if you don't pay rent. We're going to call you. We're going to text you. We're not going to be mad. We just want to make sure you know what's going on. We want to hear from you. We want to be in communication. We want to get that payment plan signed if you can. If you can't, we want to figure out a way. You know you can't afford it. Let's get you out before we ever file the eviction so that you don't get on your background. We have a lot. Again, like I said, I'm only scratching the surface of stuff here. But there's reasons we want to get in touch with people if they can't pay and get in communication with them about it. So that's rent collection. So again, there's so much more I go into there, but if you don't do rent collection right, you basically end up here with evictions. Julie Anderson is our lawyer we use for that. She's really connected with the Mary Group. Kim's not here right now, but she's really connected with the Mary Group. I've actually never met her before, but my team works with her a lot. She's very professional, know what she's doing. She's really good. If you're part of Mary, you probably have heard about her before. There's a whole stuff I could go into this, but it's probably not the most pressing issue for you guys, so I'm going to move on from here unless we have other stuff. So I'm going to go to customer service right now, and man, I could do a whole presentation, 8 hours on customer service. But anyways, these are kind of what your tenants feel like a lot of the time, isn't it? They just feel like children crying at you all the time. I got a 2-year-old. I know what it's like. It's kind of what it feels like. It's not very fun. You just kind of want to tell them to grow up. You kind of want to tell them, like, you're whining for no reason. It's just making everybody more miserable. That's what it feels like. I get it. But you get angry residents that are on you. A couple things I want to make sure you guys are aware of. First of all, some of you only have 1 resident or 0 residents. Some of you have 5, 10, or something like that. But remember 80-20. Most of your residents, especially if you're screening well, are going to be fine and good. You're going to have some that are just difficult. And just keep that in perspective that they're not all against you. There's just a couple people who are generally difficult or something went wrong with. We tend to focus on all the really bad residents, the ones that are super difficult, and we kind of make a generalization that that's all residents. It really isn't. It's just how it feels because those are the ones we deal with all the time. So we have a bias against the bad residents, and we kind of paint a brush that that's what all residents are like, which is really not. And remember, you work for them. They're paying you a lot of money. And I consider myself to be their property manager, just as like I'm their realtor, or I'm their insurance broker, or I'm their banker, or I'm their baker. I'm their property manager. I'm here to protect them. I'm here to serve them. I'm here to work for them. They're paying my paycheck. They're paying all my employees' paycheck. That's the mentality you really have to have. I mean, no matter how difficult they are or how much they hate you, you're working for them. You have to create clear rules and tell them you're going to follow those rules. You have a lease in place. My staff would lose their job if they didn't follow the lease. They're not against our residents. They're just doing what they have to do because it's the agreement that was made. They're part of this assembly line. We're just pushing things through, and we have to keep it moving. If we start tinkering with one of the cars, it shuts the whole line down. We don't want to do that. So we just have to keep our processes. It's our job to make sure that they know when the evictions are going to happen so that they can get their money in on time. It's not us for just say, okay, we got to wait for them to remember to do it. We're trying to serve them in this situation. Be on their team. Something is causing their problem. But it's not you. You're not evicting them because you want them to get evicted. You're evicting them because they didn't pay rent, and the lease says they get evicted if they don't pay rent. If they're mad because of a maintenance issue that didn't get resolved, well, even if something went wrong, okay, sympathize with them. It sucks that that didn't get solved correctly. But you can't change the past. So be mad at the past with them. Be mad at the miscommunication with them. Be on their side with this whole thing. You don't have to be us versus them. It doesn't matter who is right or wrong. You can't fix it. You know, it was a miscommunication or whatever it was. Or, you know, it was 90 or 100 degrees outside, the AC was broken, and it takes a little while to get that fixed. Yeah, it sucks. You're trying to work as fast as you can to get it done. They're mad about it. Now, they might be yelling at you, but you're just doing your job well, but you got to always be on their team. There is an enemy. It is the broken furnace that's the enemy. It's the lease that's sometimes, I use fair housing a lot. I can't get rid of your late fee, because if I get rid of your late fee, I'm breaking the law, because I didn't get rid of everybody else's late fee, and that's breaking fair housing law. My employees, I'm sure they've said this before, actually I have not overheard them, but they could just say, I'm going to lose my job if I do this. So of course I'm not going to be a buddy for you right now. I have to do things the way we do them. But, well, stick to your rules. You set clear expectations of what's going to happen. You're going to file eviction on the 15th. They don't pay the money, that's what's going to happen. That's the bad guy. That's the person that you're all mad at. Your job is to work the problem with them. How can you come up with the money? Okay, you can't. How can you move out of the property? We're not going to come up with a good solution. There's no good solution here. It's all bad. But I can come up with the best bad solution with you rather than fight about us not coming up with a good solution together. There's no reason to fight about it. Just work the problem with them. They might be mad at you for it, but redirect their anger from you to what's actually going on. Did you have a question or no? Okay. Work hard for them though. Make sure you don't let things slip. If you say you're going to get to every work order in 72 hours like we say we're going to do, make sure you hit that, and if you don't, have contingencies in place of what you're going to do if you fail your resident. So if, I can't think of a good example. Well, here's a good example. One time we didn't send out lease renewal letters on time, and the resident basically had their lease just automatically going to renew, and it kind of messed up a lot of stuff for them. So normally we charge an extra fee for a month-to-month lease. We failed our resident, so we gave them a month-to-month lease without the extra upcharge because it was our mistake. We didn't follow our end of the bargain. A lot of times if we fail with a maintenance issue of some kind, we'll give them like a $100 gift card to their favorite restaurant because we didn't hold up our end of the bargain of getting to your work order on time. We didn't communicate properly. That was on us. We didn't do our end of the bargain. But as long as we hold up our end of the bargain, we're going to follow our rules and stick to them, and we're just going to get mad at the problem together rather than against each other. Now, one thing that I don't have a whole lot of time to get into, I talk about this assembly line thing a lot. The last thing anybody wants to be treated at is a number. That's terrible customer service to treat someone like they're part of an assembly line. Good customer service is always personal. It's always individualized. I don't have a lot of time to get into all that right now, but that's how good customer service really works, is by making it so whenever we write letters to them, or like when we send out, we don't give rent credits, we send out gift cards to people's favorite restaurant. We ask that information on their application, and so if we're going to ever give them some kind of discount, let's say they love Joe's Kansas City or something like that. We don't give them $100 that's just a random $100. We give them $100 to the place they care about. They feel like we actually know who they are and care about them as a person. They're just not a number to us. But that's a whole different side of customer service I don't have time to get into. I'm kind of running back on time right now anyways. Maintenance is another thing. I'll try to go a little quicker because I don't have a ton more time. Maintenance is kind of like the sunrise. Don't you guys think? You a little confused? Well, the sunrise happens every single day. Maintenance is gonna happen, just like the sunrise. You can predict maintenance like you can predict the sunrise. It's going to happen. A lot of people hate property management because they don't want to have to fix the toilet in the middle of the night. Well, I'm sorry, toilets break. Every toilet that is working today will someday break, and someone will have to replace it or fix it. You need to expect it. So when it comes to maintenance, the first thing is you have to expect it and have a plan. You have to know what to do before it actually happens. You have to know who to call. Just be prepared for it. I think a lot of the anxiety about maintenance just comes from people not expecting it to happen and not being prepared for it and not having a plan in place. If you don't have any of that stuff, it's gonna be a bad time and everything's gonna be stressful. But if you know what you're supposed to do, only the really difficult issues become stressful. How many of you guys do your own maintenance on properties, by the way? Respect to you guys, I can't do that. That's a lot of energy and work. I hire it all out. But it's a lot of work, it's difficult, but it's just part of what it is. You have to expect it. If you don't want to do it, or you don't want to deal with it at all, it's just not going to happen that way. But second thing is be proactive, and you can prevent a lot of it. Best way to do that is that make-ready thing I told you about before. Get all that stuff right, and your property is going to be put together before someone ever rents it. If you're renting a house, what would you rather have? Walk into a house and everything generally works? Or walk into a house, 3 things break, like your refrigerator handle comes off, one of your outlets doesn't work, and your window blind doesn't go up. Now you got to call it in, have someone come out to your house. You have to fix the stuff anyways. It's not like it goes away just because you didn't fix it when you're turning the property over. Just fix it up front. That's why we do such a detailed make-ready all the time. It's because we're going to have to fix it once they move in anyways, so why not let's fix it up front, get a higher class of resident, generally rent the property for more money because it's put together better, and then just give better customer service, and people don't think they got a lemon as soon as they rent from us. Maintenance is your best form of customer service. I talked about customer service before, but this is actually the best way to do customer service. Think about it this way. If you have a good resident, when are they ever going to talk to you? Good residents, when do they need something? They always pay their rent on time. Maybe when their lease comes up a year from now, but during that time, if you want to win that period of time with them and actually get a lease renewal, you're going to interact with them 3 times. The 3 times they have a maintenance issue. If you do those things right, they're going to like you and want to keep running the place. If you screw those 3 situations up, they're going to go, why am I here? I don't know what's going to break next year. Why would I stay? Those are your only chances to win them over. Otherwise, you're not going to talk to them. The bad residents you talk to all the time because they're always late on their rent and they're close to getting evicted and all sorts of stuff like that, or they're yelling at you for one reason or another. But the good residents you really want to keep, this is your chance to keep them, is to do good maintenance, do it quick, do it right. Set the expectation for maintenance. This is what we do. When people come and sign the lease, we tell them exactly what to expect when something breaks. They have to submit a work order. They have to submit it in writing. If they just tell someone about it, nothing's happening. Nothing's going to happen if you just tell me, but you have to put it down in writing. It's part of our assembly line. I don't have time to get into, but everything has to be put down in writing. It needs to be put down in the proper order, in the proper way. And then with the vast majority of work order issues, you can expect someone to come out to your property within 72 business hours to get it resolved. Unless it's a high emergency issue, such as HVAC, running water. Running water is like run out there as soon as we can, but like HVAC, that's more of a 24-hour thing. We don't promise that necessarily, but we work really hard to make sure 24 hours is gotten, because it's really bad to be in 100-degree weather without an AC. But we also tell people before they move in, listen, if we hit a foot of snow and your furnace goes out, I'm sorry, but we might call every HVAC technician in the city and there's no one who can come out. We can't just create out of thin air a new guy who can fix your furnace. We're calling the same people everybody else is calling. So set the expectation of what they can expect. We have an emergency line. We tell them exactly how that works before they move in, so they know the process, they know what to expect. It doesn't mean they're always happy with it. People don't generally like, some people don't like us just saying you have to give us permission to enter, and once you give us permission to enter, we're going to be there within 72 hours and not necessarily tell you when it's going to be. Not everybody likes that. But if they're going to rent from us, that's what they have to deal with. We set that expectation up front. Some people moan about it later, but generally not too many because they knew that before they even put their name on the paper. Communication, 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 and communication is the other really good way to do maintenance. Setting expectations is part of that, but during the process is the other part. Again, we set a 72-hour time limit on getting maintenance issues taken care of, and that's basically everything. That's not always possible. Again, if there's a foot of snow, we might not get to, we had 200 branches down or something like that when this big snowstorm came. It was ridiculous. We didn't have enough people to get rid of all those branches. But here's the thing. If we don't get it done within 72 hours, we're going to communicate with you exactly where we are with it. We're not going to just go blank on it. We're going to communicate with you. Another thing I really like doing, we have some basements that get some water in them. We get a list of all the basements that get water in them. Whenever there's a heavy rain, we call those people before they call us saying, hey, are you having issues with water getting in your basement? We're trying to be proactive about it. We're trying to communicate with them, let them know that we know what's going on. If there's ever something going wrong, we're going to tell you exactly where. That's half the time when people are mad about maintenance because they just feel in the dark. The last thing they heard was HVAC contractor was going to come, but he never came, and now they haven't heard anything. If you have clear communication with them, they'll give you a lot more grace in these situations. I'm going a little bit too slow, unfortunately. We're going to go to leasing. I've kind of already talked about this a little bit already. What I consider leasing, what I mean by leasing in this context is the process from the application to moving day. Once they've put in the application, gotten it approved, put down a deposit to their moving day. So what I mean is this is your time to set the expectation versus reality. This is what everybody thinks they're going to get. Oftentimes, this is what people do get when it comes to property management. Now, we don't want to give them that, but there are some parts of property management that are a little ugly. Like, if you don't pay your rent, you're getting evicted on the 15th. And that's just going to happen. I don't care how nice you are. I don't care how much money you have in the bank. That's going to happen. When you submit a work order, we're going to be there within 72 hours, and you have to give permission to enter, or we don't submit your work order. There's a lot of ways a lease can go wrong, and we go over every single one of them. We have 40-some points in our lease that we talk about, so we sit down with every single person who rents from us for about an hour to an hour and a half and talk them through every point in the lease, and it's all the ugly stuff. We open up all the warts so that they know this is what happens before you move in. Got to set the expectations before they happen. That's half the reason why people are mad, because they expected the world and they didn't get it. Put everything in writing. What you want to do is when they get mad about something, like the fact that, I'm trying to think of some new examples that I can't think of. Here's a good example. The fact that water gets in their basement, and they didn't expect that. Now, we are supposed to tell people that during a lease signing that we never guarantee a dry basement. It's going to get wet someday in the next 100 years. We don't know what day that's going to be. Maybe it's going to cost $30,000 to fix, and we're not willing to fix it. You're still in your lease, even if water starts getting in that basement. You can't just leave because all of a sudden water. Did you have a question over there? Okay, sorry. So you can't just get out of your lease all of a sudden. But we put that in our lease that they signed, that they saw, that we showed them, and really important stuff we have them initial next to or sign an extra addendum for, so that we can point back to them and say, like, yeah, you're really mad about this. But when you're moving into the property, we told you this exact thing. We told you we don't guarantee dry basements, and your signature is right next to that. What do you have to complain about? I mean, this is the agreement we made. We're filling our end of the bargain. We expect you to fill yours. Get them to agree to all the words. They're going to be really happy and easygoing up front. When they actually feel it, they might not be so happy and looking, but they already agreed to it. All you're doing is fulfilling your end of the bargain. You expect them to do the same. Explain the law when it's necessary. There's one law in particular I tell people during every lease signing. This is not in our lease or any of our documentation, but in the state of Missouri, when you give a 30-day notice to vacate, nothing actually happens until the day rent is due, which is the 1st. So someone gives a 30-day notice on the 25th, nothing happens till the 1st of the month. Then on the 1st of the month, it's 30 days from then. Now, that doesn't sound like a big deal, but if someone gives a 30-day notice on the 2nd of the month, which a lot of people do because they pay rent on the 2nd or 3rd of the month, and they'll come into the office and give rent and give their notice to move. Well, like I said, nothing happens when they give it to us until rent is due. And what day is rent due? The 1st. So it turns into like a 57-day notice. People get really mad at us about that. They're stuck in their lease for an extra month, and they didn't want to be. They already planned on moving. They already bought a house. They don't want to be in that lease for an extra month. Well, this is a Missouri law. We can't really go above and beyond the Missouri law here. But most residents don't know that. So we tell them that before they ever sign it so they can protect themselves. It's our job to work hard for them and to anticipate the problems that they might have so that they don't make those mistakes. It's our job to make sure that they're educated. Go over the common pitfalls, like that's the one I just kind of explained. There's other ones. Paying rent on July 5th all the time. We always explain that one to people. Keep educating them and follow through. So throughout the lease, keep educating people on these different issues. They're going to forget. You can't tell them once and expect them to always remember. When we start renewing leases, we re-explain this kind of pitfall of not giving your notice on time many times if they have not signed a new lease. And we do it in writing, so when they fail to do it, we can point back to say, listen, we told you 3 or 4 times. What else do you want us to do? We can't do any more for you. You have to give us the notice. But then if they fail to live up to their side of the bargain, you have to follow through and say, we can't accept this notice for the end of May or whatever. It has to be for the end of June. So that's a quick briefing on leasing and setting the expectations. Again, it'll help you with your maintenance. It'll help you with your customer service. It'll help you with your rent collection. We go through that whole rent collection thing during our lease signings as well. Renewals and move-outs, again, I don't really have a lot of time to go through these. There's so much to talk about with just these categories. But again, you're looking for renewals. There's a lot you can do there. Move-outs aren't going to kill you, but it's not really necessarily what you're looking for. Really quickly, record keeping. This is kind of ironic because it's the last thing I present. It's also the last thing we think about. I mean, it's daunting. It's a lot of work, especially it piles up on you really fast. You got to do it. It's always the last thing we do. It's the last thing I talk about. I'm only making sure I talk about it because a lot of times it's just not talked about at all. So I want to make sure I at least touch on it briefly, even if I'm not giving it its fair due. There's a lot to talk about. This is one I'm choosing to just because I think it's that important. Here's the reason why it's important. Who knows what they ate for dinner on March 3rd? What about March 4th? What about what you had for lunch on June 31st? Is that even a day? I don't know if that's a day. But you're not going to remember these things, and these are the kind of details that happen. What did your maintenance contractor fix 6 months ago that they're complaining about now? I mean, are you really going to be able to remember that all that well, or remember the details, or remember that they said it was the kitchen sink and your guy fixed the bathroom sink? Who was right? You got to keep this stuff record. You got to keep these records. One, it might end up in the hands of a judge, and a judge isn't going to take your word for it. It needs to be in writing anyways. And it just creates extra work. So here's my record collection right here to kind of help you remember to do it. But do it up front right away. We have a thing in our office. We use a property management software called Rent Manager. Rent Manager is a good one. It's kind of expensive. There's other ones. AppFolio is a really popular one, especially for kind of smaller property managers. That's probably the one I would recommend for people just getting started. Just even an Excel spreadsheet will work. Oh, AppFolio? Yeah. I've never used it, so I can't really vouch for it. I know it's really popular recently. I think they're also partnered with, I think they partnered with RentLinks now as well. But you say app, A-P-P, AppFolio. But I have a saying, we use Rent Manager. I was saying if it's not in Rent Manager, it never happened. If we didn't put it in our system, it never happened. You can tell me you told the resident something, but if it's not that conversation, not Rent Manager, I don't care. You didn't do your job correctly. A judge isn't going to look at it if we don't have any record of it. That's might be where it go. We can't even verify what we did correctly if they're saying we didn't do what we say we're doing. So it just becomes he said, she said. It's extra work if you don't. You have to dig through files. You have to remember things. It's stress on your brain. You want a paper trail for everything. You want that lease or that addendum you had them sign to let them know that we weren't guaranteeing it was a dry basement. Well, if you don't have that paperwork, what good is it? It doesn't help. You got to be able to show them that they signed it. There's no point to all your work if you don't keep records of it. Basically, like it didn't happen. I mean, you can't prove it. You can't show it to the resident. You can't show it to a judge. It just turns into he said, she said. You know you're right. They know they're right. What's the point of arguing? Again, don't argue with them. You're on their team to help fix their problem anyways. So I feel bad I had to skip over that so quick, but you just got to do it. It's something no one wants to do, but you have to keep records, you have to keep them clean, and you have to keep them consistent. If you don't do it right away, you're going to forget. I mean, I don't even remember what I had for lunch yesterday.
I just wanted to also suggest Buildium as another software.
That's true. I have actually used Buildium briefly. I haven't used it so long, and I haven't heard about it a whole lot that I don't actually know how good it is at this point. But yeah, it is kind of a smaller one. Do you use it?
I have. I don't currently use it, but
Okay.
Yeah, it's very user-friendly and efficient.
Here, I'm going to give you a prize for that suggestion. So remember your air filters, everybody. I have one more to give out, so. I don't think it does either because this is a pretty small size, but remember, it's supposed to be absurd for a reason. So anyways, further learning really quick. A couple books, How to Win Friends and Influence People. This is my favorite book of all time. I read it when I was about 20. All of my kind of interpersonal skills really come from this book. I wouldn't be in the position I am today if I didn't. I would recommend to every single one of you, really listen to what it has to say, understand why it's saying what it says. It took my interpersonal abilities from almost zero to competent, basically just from reading this book. So I would recommend that to everybody. Landlord Survival Guide by Jeffrey Taylor. This is an actual property management book. I think a lot of my philosophy kind of stems from this book. A lot of what I learned came from it. There's a lot of good stuff in it. I don't use everything in it. Some stuff I wish I did that I don't, but I think it's a pretty good resource to use. Some of it you kind of have to go all in with, but I think it's a really good way to get your mind thinking in the right way too. Also, Getting Things Done by David Allen. This is kind of a productivity template for your life. It's really focused around, how to live in the moment and keep work and be able to enjoy your free time and not have a good work-life balance. But by the way it achieves that is basically how to structure the work in your life. I've kind of fallen away from a lot of the principles of it, and I suffer for it every single day at this point. If I followed what this book has to offer a little bit better, I think I would have a better work-life balance. I'd be more productive at work. I'd enjoy my family time better. It has some really good stuff. So these are some resources I found a lot from. How to follow me, if you like this. Again, this is just the surface of what I can do. I have a YouTube channel. Just search for my name. You'll find it. I did another Mary presentation that in some ways I think was a little bit better than this one about 4 years ago. That kind of goes over a lot of stuff I didn't go over today. I tried not to copy stuff, which is why I didn't quite, I kind of was jumping all over a little bit with things. But you can follow me there. If you want to subscribe to it, you can. That's probably, if you want to follow me, that's probably the best way to do it. It's also where I'm hoping to post this video if you want to recap it and watch this stuff over again. If you missed stuff, just subscribe and you'll see that new video pop up. You can also follow me on Twitter. I'll probably announce when the video is going to be ready. And also maybe when Andrew's video gets posted, because that might get posted on a different channel. If you want to do those things, I'd recommend doing them now. You're not going to remember to do them an hour from now even. Also, we have some future podcasts in the works. I have one myself that I'm hoping to do later this year. I'm going to call it the Better Landlord Podcast. Like I said, there's so many nuts and bolts when it comes to property management. I feel like I feel guilty giving you this presentation because I just feel like I glossed over so much. I missed so many details that are critical. And I don't want you guys to leave with the wrong impressions of stuff because you didn't get the full context of it. Because there really is a lot more context to everything I said. And so I'm hoping to kind of start a podcast to kind of deep dive into a lot of this stuff and really get it taken care of. Also, Andrew is going to be a part of a podcast called the Good Stewards Podcast with my father, with Ryan Dossie, who's a brilliant real estate marketer in Indiana. He owns some real estate there as well. Amanda Perkins, who works in my dad's office and is kind of an office manager. It's going to be a podcast about basically, real real estate investors and the real problems they're dealing with. Ryan kind of told me about it a little bit. He kind of said, they have a real estate investor who's going through an insurance claim, so they'll talk to him while he's going through the insurance claim so you guys can learn from real investors what's really going on, how they really handle this stuff, and what it really feels like from people who are really doing it day to day and really being successful with it in a sense. So look out for those. Again, if you want to know when those are going to come up, follow me on Twitter. We'll definitely get those for you. Don't have a ton of time. Go ahead. This is where we're at. Question.
I'm just going to ask about the new laws that were passed in Missouri. What's your experience with those?
Which laws?
The Healthy Homes Project, the ability for them to go in and inspect.
Like the one in Independence, specifically?
Kansas City has it now.
Yeah. Well, it was in Independence a little while ago. Honestly, it's pretty easy for us, honestly. I think the main reason why is because when we rented these properties, we fixed them up really heavily in the beginning. And so all that stuff was stuff we already did anyways, and we just had to find a good inspector and do the logistics of it and fix the few things. It's been an annoyance for us. It's been frustrating. It's cost us money, but it hasn't really distracted too much from what we're doing. So we haven't been too concerned about it. It's just another thing we have to do, but it hasn't caused a lot of problems for us. That's partly, I think, what it's intended to do, whether we agree with the idea or not. But it's really, people who are doing it right shouldn't have a huge amount of problems with it, and it's really supposed to catch the people who are really doing things wrong. So I don't have a lot to say about it because it hasn't really affected us in major ways. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I understand why it's there, and if you do things right, I don't think it'll be a big problem. But like I was getting into, I just wanted to open up to questions. I put a little picture of my family because I'm very proud of my family. I wanted to sneak them in here somehow. But I guess, Andrew, you can come up here too if you want to, and if you guys have any questions, just kind of chat for, someone raised their hand. Yeah, go ahead.
Real quick, typically a 12-month lease, when it's finished, does it convert to another 12-month lease, or do you go month to month, or how do you handle it?
So in our lease, our language is that it will automatically convert to a month-to-month lease if nothing happens. That rarely happens with our leases. We almost always reach out to them and say, hey, here's your options for the next year. But if we forget to, or something weird happens, or we just decide not to all of a sudden, that is the language in our lease. One of the reasons I like doing that is because I don't like people getting stuck in a year lease because they didn't get their notice in on time. They weren't planning on staying for a year. Just it's a bad situation for them, and now you have to deal with a disgruntled tenant who they don't have to stay and pay you money. They can just leave. It sucks for them and it sucks for you. So it just it's a way of punishing people that I don't really like if you do it automatically. Typically, we offer a new year lease to renew is what we offer. We also offer month-to-month leases too, but we charge about $100 more for a month-to-month lease than we do a year lease. So they can do a month-to-month lease, but they pay $100 extra every month to do that, is kind of how we do it. But we don't really let it just run out. We always kind of get in contact with them and change the lease terms or raise the rent or something like that generally. So
how often, if you have a long-term tenant for several years, how often do you raise the rent?
Usually every year. I feel like if you do small increments every year, it usually works out fine. $10 to $20 is usually not a big deal. But if you all of a sudden wait 5 years and then raise it $50, you're going to go, what happened here? So we try to make small increments to kind of keep up with the market. We don't do big increases, but again, if we wait, all of a sudden we have way under-rented properties that need some work because someone's lived in there, and we end up in this kind of bad situation we don't want to end up in. Generally raise it every year. It's another thing, setting the expectations. I tell people when they sign the lease, what's going to happen in a year? You're going to get a letter. You're going to have 3 options: to move out, sign a month-to-month lease that's $100 more than your year lease, and your lease will probably go up about this much. I can't promise, but this is what to expect. So when it happens, they're not mad that I didn't think rent was going to go up. They expect it. So.
Do you do
inspections during the lease period?
We do maintenance inspections. We try to do them twice a year. We check furnace filters, like this right here. Yeah, that's true. We replace them. Here, I'll actually give you the last one. So. But so we replace furnace filters. We check fire alarms and stuff like that. I can't remember everything that's on the list off the top of my head. Check
the AC unit.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
We make sure the resident's not
Make sure
trashing
there are
the
no
property, stuff like that. I mean, I can get all into it, but we make renewal decisions based off of how well they keep the property sometimes and what their rental history is with us. But yeah, so we do them twice a year. It's a difficult process to do. It costs a decent amount of money actually for us to do, but we think it overall preventative maintenance is going to be a lot better. I'd rather fix all the furnaces when it's warm outside than have to fix them all when it's cold outside. So, any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Do you use any application when you are doing the move in or move out with the pictures that you take of the things that are either missing or that needs to be repaired? Because it's hard to keep.
It does have a feature where you can kind of put in a move-in inspection and a move-out inspection. We actually don't really use that. We go outside of our manager for it. We take like 150 pictures of the property before someone moves in, and those are kind of our pre-move-in condition pictures of the property. And then we do that inspection at the end when they move out, take pictures of everything that's broken, and anything that's fixed in the before picture and broken in the after picture. Well, who broke that? Was it the owner or was it the resident? If the resident broke it, like the window blinds that were fixed when they moved in, they're going to get charged for it when they move out. It's a ton of documentation. It takes a lot of time and energy. But if they ever argue it, it's like, okay, here's the before picture. Here's the policy of you having to pay for window blinds. Here's the after picture. What are you arguing about? I mean, this is your signature's right here. I don't know what's the point of arguing. They might still argue, but you put that in front of a judge, it's pretty convincing. So I think
I would make one other point on that. Just obviously we've put together a lot of systems over the years. This has been a process over time.
Yes.
You're not going to get there immediately. So I wouldn't see this as being overwhelming. Like you've got to get all this stuff in place before you can even start. You want to get some of it in place and then keep building one step at a time, and it will just make it easier and easier as you go. I think we're a little bit over time, so we should probably call it.
End of presentation. Thank you. Here's a cute cat for you guys.
Thank you.